Did you know that Gibson Guitars was founded by Orville Gibson in 1902 as the Gibson Mandolin Guitar Manufacturing Company? Or did you know that even though the company was founded in 1902, Orville Gibson actually started making guitars in 1894? Yeah, that's a long time ago, over 100 years now. Be sure and watch through the whole video because I'm gonna give you 38 more facts that you did not know about Gibson guitars. Like the fact that guitar innovation was actually huge in the 1920s with Gibson manufacturing at the front of the line. It was during this time that Gibson actually engineered the adjustable truss rod in the guitar and the adjustable height bridge. Gibson Guitars actually still uses this truss rod design today in 2023. In 1935, Gibson released the EH-150, which was their first attempt at an electric guitar, even though it is vastly different from what we would see today. It was actually a lap steel guitar. Shortly after, in 1936, Gibson released the first electric Spanish guitar called the ES-150. By the way, the ES on some Gibson models actually stands for Electric Spanish and became really popular with the model, the ES-335, which didn't come out until way later in 1958. In the same year, Gibson actually released the ES-345, which is just like the 335 with some differences like the split parallelogram inlays, a Veritone switch, some gold hardware, and a stereo output jack. Just to let you guys know, these are actually my favorite inlays on a Gibson guitar, is a 345. The price tag in 1958 of a 345 was actually, who would have guessed, $345. What a whopping price, which is really crazy to think about because now the current version of the Gibson ES-345 goes for $37.99. Pretty crazy. I know that I just said that the current version of the ES-345 goes for $37.99, but the original was actually discontinued in 1982. And the version that is out today has some major differences from the one that was discontinued, like the fact that there is no Veritone switch on the modern one. And the one today is called the ES-345 60s. Let's switch over to the Gibson Les Paul. In 1952, Gibson Guitars had a collaboration with artist Les Paul, who introduced their first artist model called the Gibson Les Paul. Everybody knows that one? I don't know, maybe you didn't know that one. The original 1952 Gibson Les Paul released actually as a gold top with not one, but two P90 pickups. The Les Paul was actually the first solid body designed by Gibson, and it's still obviously an icon today, being one of the most sold guitars ever. In fact, we sell a ton of Les Pauls weekly alone at the guitar shop that I work at. Still to this day in 2023. Pretty wild. In 1946, Les Paul actually suggested the idea of a solid body guitar to Gibson Guitars, but the idea was just disregarded. Actually, according to the internet, the idea was chuckled at and shrugged off. But if you really think about it, they could have said yes, and the Gibson Les Paul could have been out as early as 1946 instead of 1952. The original price of a 1952 Gibson Les Paul was $210. Nowadays, 50s guitars can easily go in the 5-figure bracket. So if you are the original owner of one and you have one in great condition, well, good job. You did really well. You now are rich. In 1957, Gibson Les Pauls actually started using humbucking pickups, which did exactly what they described. They bucked the hum out of the pickup. So no more hum, you don't have to worry about that. They were originally designed by Seth Lover and labeled as patent applied for, or the PAF pickup, and is still one of the most popular pickups. If you had an original one of those, they would also be worth quite a few Freedom units. The Les Paul with two humbucking pickups eventually became the Les Paul standard in 1958 and was made by a small group of luthiers in Kalamazoo, Michigan. But in 1961, Gibson released a new version of the Les Paul, which had a thinner body and a double cutaway. Later, this guitar became known as the Gibson SG, but for the first couple of years, it was actually still called the Les Paul. The reason that the name was actually changed to SG was the fact that Les Paul did not want his name associated with this new model on the market. He actually looked at the guitar as a tool of lesser functionality and lesser tonal performance, which, as an SG guy, I really gotta disagree. Did you know that the SG in Gibson SG actually stands for solid guitar? Between 1976 and 1984, the production of Gibson guitars was actually shifted from Kalamazoo, Michigan to Nashville, Tennessee, where it still resides today. The Michigan plant was still used for custom-made guitars for a little while, but eventually it did close its doors in 1984. I want to talk about lawsuits for a second. Let's get into that. In 1977, Gibson sued Hoshino, Ibanez Guitars, for copying their archtop headstock design, but the lawsuit actually did settle out of court, and Ibanez eventually did change the design of the headstock. In 2005, Gibson did sue PRS Guitars for the single cut design, and initially, although this was a successful endeavor, eventually the courts did drop the lawsuit, and we still have the PRS single cut today. Gibson did also send a cease and desist to Kiesel Guitars about their Ultra V and their California single cut model, claiming that it infringed on their own Flying V guitars. I'll have to do some more research about that one. If anybody knows, let me know in the comments. In 2019, Gibson sued Dean Guitars over trademarked guitars and even names. And in 2022, last year, the courts ruled that Dean was infringing on these, and Dean lost rights to the Dean Z, the Flying V, and a couple others as well. I think the GS might have been in there as well. Yeah, over the years, Gibson has been a little bit sue happy, lawsuit happy, whatever you want to call it. They like their lawyers, but I'm still a member of the Gibson family. Who's gonna argue me in the comments? At one point, Gibson did make robot tuners. This actually debuted in 2007 as a tuner that would fit on the back of the headstock and tune the guitar itself, with you just simply strumming the instrument. In 2015, Gibson made the robot tuners a proprietary piece of the guitar, although this was not received well. And still to this day, I get customers into the guitar shop who come and want to have us take these off and put on new tuners. So I guess that didn't work out for them. In 1982, Gibson released the Gibson Corvus, which was originally designed as a headless guitar and an offset V cutout, and is one of the weirdest looking guitars ever. Gibson has a lot of really weird guitars that have gone under the radar over the years. I'm always looking for them, but this to me is one of the weirdest looking ones. There's also the Gibson Reverse Flying V, which was released in 2007 as a limited production run of only 400 models, but it did have some initial success, and they continued it into 2008, where they made another 900 of them. That is a funky looking Flying V, well, reverse Flying V, but something about it when you play it is just so right. So for the last 10 facts about my favorite guitar brand, I thought I would put out there the most interesting or weird ones that I could think of. If you have your own, please let me know in the comments. I would love to chat more on this subject. And also, if you haven't already, do me a favor, thumbs up this video and subscribe to my channel for more content. One of the most expensive Gibson guitars ever sold was actually John Lennon's guitar. This was a Gibson J60E, which sold for $2,400,000. That is one expensive guitar. I don't know if anybody remembers this, but a few years ago in 2021, Gibson actually partnered with Rally, which allowed customers or consumers to invest $5 to $10 into one of 3 different prototypes that I think are still held at the Nashville Gibson garage. I could be mistaken on that, but you could invest $5 to $10 into one of 3 prototypes by Adam Jones / or Tony Iommi. Now, I don't know about you, but if I invest $5 to $10, I should be able to play one of those prototypes for at least 5 minutes as a partial owner, right? In 2019, Gibson actually bulldozed hundreds of Firebird X guitars, claiming that they were unsalvageable, which I think is kind of sad because some of these guitars could have been donated, and as somebody who really loves music and knows that there are so many people struggling out there, there are people who absolutely could have used those guitars. There's actually footage of the bulldozing still online, so if you want to see it, go search for that. You can see all these Gibson Firebirds just being crushed.
Decimated.
According to Guitar Center's website, the Gibson SG is actually the company's #1 all-time selling guitar. It's also my favorite guitar, so congratulations, Gibson SG. It's interesting to think that at first Les Paul didn't really like the SG too, so maybe he should have put his name on it? I don't know. Did you know that Gibson also made guitar amps as early as 1952? I've actually had the luxury of playing some of them, and while they are pretty basic, they are pretty cool and definitely give me the vintage feel. So, pretty wild. It's a vintage experience. As far as artist models go, the Gibson Les Paul is by far the #1 selling artist model. You know, we've sold so many, and it still sells so many to this day. Pretty crazy to think about. In 2011, Gibson Guitars was actually raided by authorities who seized a bunch of rosewood and ebony wood that was claimed to have been illegally imported from India. This is actually one of my favorite little Gibson fun facts out there, but in the movie Back to the Future, Marty McFly actually travels back to 1955 and he plays a Gibson ES345, even though that model didn't come out until 1958. He was just a little bit early, I guess. In the 2003 film School of Rock, Jack Black's character is actually on the brink of homelessness. He's trying to sell one of his guitars, which is a 1968 Gibson SG in what he calls mint condition, which is funny because he's $2,000 in debt, but nowadays that guitar would easily go for over 10 G's. So pretty wild how collectible some of these vintage guitars have become. If you see one out there, be sure and buy it. Gibson actually introduced its double neck instruments as early as 1958 with one really interesting oddball. The EDS 1275. This guitar had one neck that was a standard guitar and a second neck that was actually a mandolin neck. Pretty weird. I would love to see one of those, and I would love to be able to do a video on one of those one day. And now for the last fact in this video. Gibson guitars have been known to have the headstock break off if it takes a hit or if it takes a fall. Often though, however, this break can be fixed and the guitar is very unlikely to break in the same spot ever again because the amount of glue that is required to hold that neck back on there makes the guitar stronger than ever. So if you drop it again and it breaks again, it's probably going to be in a different location. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm interested to hear your Gibson facts and your Gibson comments. Be sure to subscribe to my channel as it helps me out a ton, and I'd like for others to see this kind of content. I'll see you later. Peace.